القصة الجديدة من سلسلة تعزيز المهارات. So welcome again, Ramadan Mubarak, and welcome everyone for this new series of reinforcements, capacity building and capacity reinforcement series. It's actually on a very important topic that I am sure our faculty are going to appreciate very much, because the topic revolves around strategies of student engagement. I'm very honored and pleased today to have with us two very illustrious professors from the University of Arizona, from ASU, who are here with us. I'm going to first go ahead and share my screen before introducing them shortly and giving them the floor to introduce themselves. And probably walk you through any tips for interpreting and how to access translation. So for those of you who may need to know how to access the Arabic channel, here is a little illustration. هنا تبيين بالنسبة للأساتذة الذين يودون الولوج إلى الترجمة إلى اللغة العربية، فما عليكم إلا النقر في الأماكن الموضوعة واختيار اللغة العربية. سوف أترك هذه النافذة مفتوحة لبعض الثواني قبل أن أمر لتقديم ضيوفنا. So just leaving this for a few seconds for people who may want to use translation, Arabic translation. I'm sure most of the participants by now are familiar with this. Okay, so going back to our topic today, which is around strategies of student engagement. As I said, we have two professors. We have Professor Kristen Arnold, who's a clinical assistant professor at the Arizona State University, Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. And we have Professor Katie Morris, who's an instructor at the same university, Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. So first, let me ask probably Katie and Kristen if they would like to say a few words, introductory words before we jump into our discussion today. Christy?
Bonjour, everybody. Ramadan Mubarak. Great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kristen Arnold, and I am a professor at Arizona State. As Samad said, I have been a kindergarten through 12th grade teacher for 8 years, and I have been a college professor now for 7 years, working with graduate students and undergraduate students in both general and special education, so students with and without disabilities. At ASU, my focus in research and practice has been on how to connect theory and practice, and for students who are learning to be teachers to engage in the practice of teaching to build capacity. So that's the focus of my work. I've taught differentiated instruction, elementary literacy. I have taught advanced instructional technologies, and I'm very excited to be here today. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Katie?
Hello, everyone. Ramadan Mubarak. My name is Katie Morris, and I'm an instructor at ASU. And I also was a classroom teacher. I taught first grade, second grade, third grade, all the way through elementary school. And then I also had the opportunity to become an instructional coach while I was still working in the elementary schools. So I was able to go into teachers' classrooms and directly support instruction, model lessons, and work with students and teachers in the classroom at the elementary level. And now for the last 9 years or so, I am an instructor in teacher preparation, and I have the opportunity to work with our teacher candidates who are training to become teachers. And I teach many literacy courses. So I'm teaching them how to teach reading to their students, how to teach writing, and also children's literature. And sometimes I get some other interesting courses in there also. But I love my work training teachers, and I really value their teacher preparation. And I feel that we have such an opportunity to support our teacher candidates in becoming excellent teachers through the high quality work we do in our classrooms.
Well, thank you, Kristen and Katie. I mean, the passion is visible in the way you present what you do. So thank you for that. And I think we can jump right into our discussion today. And as you know, we usually have these sessions in an interactive, casual way. So I'll be asking some questions and asking you to chip in. And we'll start with the first question, which says basically, how do you define student engagement? How do you know that your students in your classroom are engaged? Katie, would you like to kickstart?
I would. So, we define student engagement as we see that our students are actively participating, they're involved in the instruction, they are on topic, perhaps interested and curious. Sometimes it's an energy even in the space, because as students are engaged, they sometimes get excited, they're making connections. So, they're on topic, and they just are actively involved in the content that we are providing for them.
Kristen, any additions to this first definition or description of how engagement actually perspires?
Yes, I love what Katie said about active participation. It's also something that we can observe as teachers when we see energy and effort expended into the course and into the activities that we're asking them to do. The more that they're engaged and empowered within our learning community, the more likely they are to kind of channel that energy back into their learning. And so really seeing a connection between the teacher and my students, that's one connection, and then having them connect socially with each other. We also see engagement there. And then also seeing connectivity between the content and the student. So really engagement should involve kind of a circular process, not only as we're managing the course and we're instructing, but also in the daily activities that we're engaged in. I know when my students are engaged, when I can see visible participation, active discussion, they're asking questions, they're fully present. I also know that they're engaged when there's a lot of dialogue between one another. I know that they've read the material, they're not asleep in class. And I know that I see just heightened inquiry and the questions that they're asking. And so elevating their capacity for teaching through discussion, through dialogue, and the questions that they're asking, as well as content mastery. I know they're engaged when their grades are where they should be, where they're successful in mastering that content. Anything else to add, Katie, as far as behaviors that you see?
Yeah, everything that you shared there, absolutely. And they have that desire. I think they see how this is valuable to them as a teacher. That really is a way that I know that they're engaged, because they're directly asking questions that show me that they value that they're learning. They're asking questions about their internships that they're in. They're sharing stories and connections from their internships. They're asking questions about their future instruction. And so that authenticity, where they see that their learning matters, they're not just doing it to pass a test or to get some grade and move on. I think that is really important. And like you said, their presence, they are valuing that time that we're together and engaging in that way. It's really important.
I've also noticed a difference too in the sustained effort. I see a lot of students who tend to engage in the beginning, and then as their interest declines, their engagement declines, so does their performance. So if they're able to sustain high quality work from the beginning of the course to the end, I know that they're engaged enough, to sustain that effort throughout.
How does this process actually work during internships? How would you describe engagement in this other context?
So when our teacher candidates, they're in two roles. They're operating as a student in my classroom, but they're also operating as a teacher in their practicum or in their internship experience. And I serve as a guide between those two learning spaces. So as long as I can help them see the connection of what they're learning in the content, and then being able to apply it in the classroom, then again, we have this wonderful circular experience where they're seeing different practices in action. They're learning best practices in our classroom, in our university classroom, and then they're applying them as best they can within that internship.
Let me just go for this housekeeping, announcement meant more for the audience. I know by the way, we have a very dynamic audience. And I would love to start introducing the questions as we go along. But for our audience, I just want to remind them to use the Q&A section to ask the questions rather than the chat section. So if the translator could make that clear, that for questions, if our audience could use the Q&A section, because I will be trying to introduce your questions as we go along. There will be a Q&A session at the end, but for people who want to react immediately, I'll do my best to relay the questions as we go along. So thank you very much. This is pretty exhaustive as an introduction. I will probably jump off to our next question, which goes a little bit into the heart of things. So what are some of the barriers to students fully engaging in the content that you have observed?
Our students in Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College that I observe often have very full course loads. They take a lot of classes. And so the impact sometimes of their outside world, their family obligations. We have a lot of students actually that work. Some of our students work a lot of hours outside of class. They do have the wonderful internship, which is great practice for them. However, sometimes I notice that a barrier can just sort of be the load, the burden of all of the responsibilities that they are carrying. And in addition to their health and their emotional and mental wellness, those can be challenges. Sometimes when they walk into the classroom space, visibly, I can see that they are not at their best when they come in. For example, I had a student 2 days ago, and she just wasn't herself. I could see that she wasn't as engaged as she usually is. she was more distracted by her technology, which technology can be a wonderful tool and can also be a distraction at times. And she just didn't seem at her normal level of engagement with her peers and conversation and eye contact in discussion with her peers. And I did ask her what was, if everything was okay. And she shared that she had hurt her back that morning. And so just physically was having a really hard time engaging in the way she normally would. So that's just one example. But, I think those are some of the challenges that I find is what students sometimes carry with them into the classroom can provide a challenge. And then it's my role to notice and to validate my students and then to find ways to engage them and help them participate and still have a wonderful learning session and learn what they need to learn from that day, even if they are facing some outside challenges.
What degree of intimacy would that suppose with your students? Because I found it very interesting how much your sense of observation is called upon, and what strategies do you implement in order to respond to that situation. Kristen, if you can react to this, I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so part of the connectivity that I love what Katie's talking about is knowing who your students are as individuals. And I think modeling that is something that is very important to me. My students have a lot more buy-in when they know that I am invested in their success. And so some strategies that I like to implement to get to know my students is just asking personal questions to the whole group and having them share things about their life, and really removing that barrier between the professor and the student by opening up conversations. I also have open office hours on Zoom where they can come and ask questions if they need support. They need to feel comfortable in approaching me to ask for things that they need. And part of being a culturally responsive teacher is that I'm understanding what their needs might be. And in modeling that, they're more likely to implement that with their own students. So knowing their interests, taking an interest inventory is something that I also do. I also put out Google Forms at the beginning of the semester, asking specific questions. What are the demands outside school? What is your family? What are your family needs? Do you have any accommodations that you need for the class? So I'm not a counselor, but I also need to know about my students so that they understand that I am invested in their success. If that helps a little bit.
These are proactive steps that you take before even embarking on your classes.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, that's. I have a question here from actually one of our professors, Mustafa Bouali, who says, are there any specific strategies to basically that would be more effective in student involvement? What are some of the most effective strategies?
Katie, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, and I think this might even go into question 3, I'm thinking. But there are so many to pick from. What I find with my students is most effective in my instruction is really ensuring that they have talk time and they have time to actively do something with the content that they're learning. So I do very little bits of my own talking and sharing of ideas, and then I chunk the material so that we don't go for 20 minutes or something with just me talking. We do very short bits of time where I present a question or share an idea or even an image or a very short video or something to connect with the content that they've already read. And then I try to put the responsibility onto students very frequently throughout the whole classroom, throughout the whole class time. So small groups, I'll have partnerships working together. Sometimes I provide a role where partner A, this is your job. Partner B, the other partner, this is your job. And so I give students ownership of their learning as much as possible in my course. Small groups, partnerships. Also, if I do notice that students look especially tired or, disengaged in a particular way, I try to get students up out of their seats, and I'll ask them to go find a person across the room, a peer across the room, and go talk to that person about the question that I've posed or share an idea from their internship, so that they're up, they're physically moving, it wakens them up if they need that. And then we can come back. But I use those types of engagement interaction strategies where they are interacting with each other consistently over and over throughout every single class session.
Professor Gamgami asks a question about whether the input knowledge and textbook content
I'm sorry, Sama, can you repeat the question?
Can be considered
Samad, you froze for a moment, but Tanya,
Hello?
hi there. Hi. Oh, I think. Oh,
Hello, I guess I lost you.
Oh, that's okay. I think you're back. So Tanya put the question in the chat. Does that capture the question accurately? The input knowledge and textbook content, a filter for students' engagement. So in a positive or negative sense. Is there anything else, Samad, that you would like to add to that question?
No, I don't know if you heard the question that Dr. Gamgami asked. I'll repeat it. And his question is, are the input knowledge and textbook content a filter for student engagement, whether be it in a positive or a negative way?
So the way that I typically engage students in the content is I will look ahead at the textbook to ensure that it matches our goals and objectives for the day. And just like Katie said, chunking out that information in a series of constructive steps. So I engage in something called reading circles, where I will have them focus on particular sections or focused readings of the text and process it through discussion and ask questions. I also utilize something called graphic organizers, where they will take that textbook content and answer questions that I've established as valuable and important for their learning. And I'll make sure that they collaborate together in a Google document to share their thoughts and connections with the text. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but those are some ways. I know that the textbook itself can sometimes be a barrier, and students don't always often engage in reading the full chapters. And so it's my job to extract what is most important and a focus for that particular session. Otherwise, we have situations with cognitive overload, and they aren't sure how to filter information that's always important. So that's one thing that I'll do is utilize those reading circles.
Thank you so much. I have another question, which from Professor Snibar Ahmed, who's asking whether material motivational steps, such as grades or evaluations, can be effective ways to increase student engagement. Katie, any thoughts?
I think our students are different. And so I think some students are very, very motivated by their grade and by their performance on particular assessments. And other students respond a little bit differently, where they're not as motivated to feel like they have to, have every little detail right or completely, filled out or something. And so I think that sometimes students, like I said, they do get motivated by those, but I try not to use that as like something that that they have to keep reaching and reaching for, and it limits their ability to participate. I don't know, Kristen.
Yeah, that's a great point. I also see more motivation when they see their own students in their practicum classrooms. Nothing is more motivating to a teacher than seeing their students learn and progress. And you see this shift from student to teacher in the different programs, especially in the later years, where they see a connectivity between what they do and what they learn and the knowledge and skills they have. And they are so motivated to see their own students succeed, especially in the primary grades. And so when they see their own students progress, they look at how their own practice impacts that student's learning. And so they're more engaged when they see a direct effect. I see that's more powerful. I believe it's more powerful than a letter grade or a number grade on an assignment. At least that's what I've observed in my students.
That's so great, Kristen. I completely agree. My students love to share the ways that they've seen their students learn, the ways that they've grown. And in my classroom, I also try to model that for my students by highlighting for them the ways that they've grown and learned. So I might say to them, wow, look at what you are able to do today. You're able to plan a lesson, teach the lesson, have critical conversations about the implementation of the lesson, and think of how far you've grown and developed as a teacher candidate. And so my feedback to them, I think that is more valuable, like you said, than the letter grade. I provide that feedback to them in class as we're learning. And I also give that feedback to them on their assignments. I try to really highlight for them so that they can see back how much that they've learned. This part right here, this demonstrates how much you're learning and growing as a teacher candidate.
Very, very compelling indeed. And Katie and Kristen, as I explained earlier, we are dedicating a section for the training of our research and development group members on UDL, on Universal Design for Learning. So no wonder that some of the questions start to pop up around UDL. And one of our professors, Professor Saeed Kamiti, is asking us, basically, what is the link between what you have been discussing and UDL strategies? In other words, what modes of engagements, how can you describe the modes of engagement from a UDL lens? And I'll start probably with Kristen. Kristen?
Yeah, so one of the tenets of UDL is to recruit student interest. And so several ways that I do that are to provide choice to my students and the modes of learning that they're engaged in. They can listen to an audio, they can watch a video, they can read a text. Giving them options increases those access points for learning. I'll also reiterate the relevance of the content that I want them to learn and how they're going to utilize it in the classroom. And I always set expectations that really minimize the distractions in class, whether I'm in an online setting or whether I'm in the classroom directly. So it's really several ways that I recruit their interest. And then my next step would be just to make sure that they have a deep awareness of those goals and objectives that we are after. And I have explained those clearly and explicitly. And then in different ways, sometimes it takes multiple reminders in different ways to explain it, whether they're seeing it, whether they're hearing it. And the organization of the class in that manner really makes a big difference as to their level of awareness of what those goals are, and then also their interest level.
Wonderful. Katie, would you like to build on this with, yeah?
Yes. So in addition, I also start every class session with my objective and my agenda posted for students. And I make the learning really visible, really clear, so that they know what's expected of them in the class session. And then as we move through the class session, I continue to bring up the objective and the agenda so that they can see the progress through the lesson. I find that to be really helpful in guiding their learning. And, as students are within the classroom, also those engagement strategies of providing all different ways, like Kristen said, for them to interact. So I try to have ways that they're interacting with actual materials in their hands sometimes. So they might have cards with the information on the cards, and then they're doing some matching as a way to, have more of a total response. Like Kristen said, we might have a video, we might have, a reading, but there's lots of ways for them to engage in the content itself. And then many opportunities for them then to take ownership and responsibility of the material, where they are then having to take the material and maybe teach their peers. And so that role shifts, where then they have that ownership so they can leave. The goal, of course, is that they do this in their own classroom. So I really work to make sure that they have ownership of that material and through different roles and interactions with their peers.
Wonderful. There's a good flow of questions. All of them are really compelling and relevant. The one that goes hand in hand with UDL is around students with special needs. So if you can just say a few words about that. And then another typical case here that professors here in Morocco tend to grapple with are what we call various level classrooms. A lot of the teachers, when they're first assigned, their first assignments is in rural areas, where in many cases they have to deal with classes with different levels, so multi-level classrooms. So can you just briefly speak about these two categories? What kind of strategies that can be applied in these two cases?
Yes, so when we're looking at mixed ability classrooms, whether we're teaching young ones or we're teaching college students, I like to incorporate a high degree of differentiated instruction. So I state the learning goal and objective, and I realize that some students, and I've had students who learning to be teachers. I had quite a few last semester actually, who also have learning disabilities, who have autism, who also are aspiring teachers. So for me, making sure that I'm making those accommodations, whether I'm providing speech to text material, whether and this is where UDL is very, very important, because they need those accommodations for curricular access. I can't expect them to learn in the same way as someone without a disability. So it's my job to make sure that they're able to access that content. And one of the biggest ways that I do that and I model is through blended learning and the use of technology, because we know technology, even a little bit, can increase engagement in a significant way. Some of my students work more slowly than others. So I like to use what's called a Nearpod, which is a self-guided interactive lesson where they click on it and they move through at their own speed. I also use a lot of station rotations in my classroom. So Samad, do you mind if I share my screen briefly and I'll just show this example
Oh, certainly.
visually?
Yeah.
Oh, let's see.
There
I
we-
think you might have to stop
yeah,
sharing
I will unshare. Yeah. Yeah.
just
Please.
briefly. I just want to show this visual. So this is one way that I make sure that differentiation has a structure. So I will be teaching a group here in one corner of the classroom, and then in another corner of the classroom, students might be working in an online project independently or collaboratively with each other. It just depends. And then I'll also have some different stations and some different activities for them to engage in. Blended learning has a lot of different models, and this is a resource for you that would be very helpful in the differentiation process. When we talk about a flipped classroom, this is another way that I also differentiate my instruction so that students have a chance to come prepared, knowing some of the material before we discuss it in class. It gives them time to process as they need to, either quickly or slowly. And students who learn more quickly than others also benefit. So you're really catering across the spectrum of students who work in different paces using the flipped model and some of these different tenets of blended learning. I found that's the most efficient way for me, so I don't stay up all night planning lessons. And so it makes it very simple and efficient to navigate. It's a little bit more work up front, but once you have a system down, it becomes much easier for yourself and for your students.
Wonderful. Well, probably one last question before we move on to the next, big question comes from Professor Melluki. And I think I can totally see where this question comes from. His question is, how do you give a taste of learning and engagement to shy students? The question is, what are the strategies towards these types of students who may not find the courage of participating? Typically, you have some students who are very active and others who are just in the back rows, not really manifesting themselves. So any tips with regard to engaging these type of students?
Sure. I really try to think of ways that feel low risk to that student. So it doesn't feel like that shy student getting up and having to share something personal in front of everyone if that's not comfortable to that student. So as I'm planning out my lessons or guiding, my students through our instruction, I really think about ways that they can participate that will be comfortable for them, but that also really maximize their learning. And so partnerships are usually a great way to put students together, especially when you provide the task. So asking students to respond to a question or to try something as the teacher, maybe they are planning a reading comprehension lesson. And so when we put students together, those students that are more shy or maybe not as engaged, some of them, they have that responsibility to their partner where they are now going to work as a teammate. And it's low risk where they are not sharing in front of 40 people, but they have the opportunity to engage in that dialogue with their partner. This is also where assigning your students roles can be really helpful, especially if you do have students that start to dominate the conversation or dominate a partnership or dominate a small group, is that we can provide our students with specific roles of how they can participate. So this partner's job is the researcher, and this partner's job is the synthesizer or something. And so if you share a role for those students, then that student, typically I've found, fills that role. They see their participation as necessary to the learning of the group, and that their participation actually elevates everyone else is learning. I try to say that often in my class, is that that we are a team working to support each other, and the more that we participate through these types of roles, the more students learn. And I find that students really have exceptional participation when those groups are smaller, when it's very clear and defined of what the expectation is. I typically, as I'm walking around monitoring students, they're asking engaged questions. They are practicing the instruction that I'm asking them to practice. Here's an example from last week where we are focusing on reading fluency. And I presented them with a model for a really very easy but practical way that they can teach a reading fluency lesson in their internship classroom. And so first, I provided them with the reading material, and I put them into planning teams. So they were with a small group of students where they were required to look through the reading passage and follow the criteria of how to plan a fluency development lesson. So supporting their readers and becoming more fluent. After 5 minutes of planning, then I broke them up again. So this is a jigsaw strategy. And they went to different groups and they taught. So now they planned first, and then they went to a different group, and their role was to teach their fluency lesson. So we do a lot of this, we call it micro teaching, or teaching in the actual college classroom, where they take on the role as the teacher, and they are practicing their teaching skills, and they're teaching to each other. And when everyone is responsible for that teaching, I find 100% engagement. Everyone is serving the role, whether they are the teacher or the student in that time. It really maximizes the way that they're able to learn and to support everyone else's learning in the course.
Very interesting indeed. I feel, Kristen, that we will still have to stick with this main question, I would say, because I can see a number of questions trickling in, and I feel like we need to give these questions their right attention. One of the question is around gamification, and this is Professor Tinfu Muhammad, who says, to what extent can gamification pedagogy contribute to, especially talking from a learner, obviously, learner perspective?
I'm
Kristen?
so sorry, Samad. You cut out right in the middle of your question. Would you mind repeating it? I'm so sorry.
Oh, sorry, it's my mistake. Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Yes. So basically, the question is around gamification pedagogy and its role in motivating, engaging students.
Okay, so in my understanding of gamification pedagogy, can you expound on that a little bit as how it's used?
Yes, I mean, basically, I think what Professor Tinfu wants is how can gamification pedagogy utilized in a classroom context to increase student involvement?
So we all love competition, little friendly competition. One of the things I found very motivating is assigning arbitrary points to teams as a model for something that they can do in their own classroom. So I will have students divided up into, let's see, 5 teams of 4 or whatever the number it is, and each person has a protocol for their role, just as Katie was talking about, depending on the activity. When it comes to vocabulary, that's something that I would use a gamification strategy with. When it comes to something where they're having to do quick recall, those are always engaging. If it's new terminology, I will use it. But as far as content mastery and performance-based assessments, I tend to not use that. When I see some different vocabulary games. They can use their cell phones. QR codes are really effective in earning these points. And so different strategies, but mostly I use it for, like I said, recall and vocabulary instruction. Does that help a little bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Katie, I see you nodding. Would you like to chip in as well?
Yeah, I think the way that I use game-like instruction in my class is, and depending on the class, of course, but I use a lot of activities that to the students feel like a game, but the goal is a collaboration of figuring something out. So less so that it's based on like a winner or a score, but where they have a goal that they're trying to solve something. So almost more like puzzles. And so we might have, I think vocabulary is an excellent example. I'll use the course vocabulary, so the vocabulary from their course text even, or, as we're understanding how to teach readers, we can use some of those concepts that they need to master, things like that. And I use a lot of what's called sorting. So I might print out different cards where students do matching, so we can turn it into a matching game, or there might be headings of categories. And this is really universal. You can use it for any content because usually content tends to come in categories. So you can have those categories and then students work with their team to sort of solve the puzzle. And they are reading examples, they might have quotes or definitions or pictures, and they're working together to try to solve, and through the solving, they of course are learning, they are using the language of the content, which really is my goal when I do these types of activities, is I want, rather than me saying those important words, I want them using that language so that they have that ownership. I find those to be really valuable for all different types of purposes, these sort of teaming games.
Thank you both. These are really impressive tips and pointers for our professors. I'm sure they're going to be of great use. I'm going to ask this one last question before we go to the next big question, because there's a question coming in about remote teaching. And so the question is, comes from Professor Delbouh Ahmed, who says, are there any particular strategies to use in remote teaching to increase student engagement? So obviously, especially now, everybody is engrossed into remote teaching and online teaching. Any thoughts, Kristen?
Yes, so one of the things that I've studied very closely is the use of rehearsal and practice in an online setting for self-analysis. So I will have my students collaborate on Zoom, for example. They will collectively plan a lesson and give each other feedback using a protocol that I've provided. And after they plan it, they teach it, they record themselves, and then they conduct a self-analysis of their own lesson and then a peer analysis. This can all be done on video. And that's the wonderful thing about video and teaching, is that they can see in a very objective manner whether or not they've hit the targets that they need to teach. It allows for very intensive reflection and then refinement of their practice. So that's probably been the most effective tool that I've used, is Zoom for that, and Zoom recordings for both collaboration and teaching practice. But I also find that they collaborate more effectively when they know each other well. And so it's important that they have utility of those back channels for communication, whether it's texting each other, helping each other understand what the expectations are of the assignment. Slack has been a good venue for that, as well as WhatsApp on their phones. So creating that connectivity without me is important, and then also with me in a Zoom-like setting. I also use a lot of Google Documents as a collaborative tool so that they can type in to the document. I can see their thinking real time come through. I've used that for a long time and find it very effective, as well as having them during a class session. I have a virtual whiteboard and everybody collaborates in the same class in the same Google document. And I'll have a place where everybody can put their input. So I have 100% accountability during those online sessions. So I know they're not just tuning in and turning off their screen and tuning out. I can see their thinking evolve in the Google document as evidence of their learning. So those are just a few. I enjoy that piece of it. It's definitely a problem that we've had to solve over the past few years, but it can be done and community can be built online.
Well, definitely the possibilities of collaborative work and, and having and doing things in a more fun way are great ways that are now offered by the online possibilities. Katie, any additions?
I would say in addition to those, using the Zoom as a way to really practice and teach those lessons, I found that also to be really effective. Some of the same methods work well, like the chunking. So, I was sharing how I tend to chunk my instruction. I also do that in the virtual, course I teach. I teach a course fully on Zoom. And by chunking the material, I'm able to increase my student engagement. So again, I have something for them, whether it's a question or an activity or something to help them engage the content. And then I use those breakout rooms very frequently throughout my class. And I change the breakout rooms sometimes depending on my purpose. Sometimes the breakout room is the same and they keep returning back to the same group. It just depends on the purpose. Sometimes I'll even put them into breakout rooms where it's just a partnership. And again, sometimes because it's only a partnership, you do feel that responsibility to make sure to contribute, because if one person talks and one person doesn't say anything, there's not much conversation there. So sometimes I'll even use breakout rooms where it's only two people per room. And then again, they're responsible either for coming back and sharing to the group through, we use the chat, or, I encourage my students also to unmute and collectively we can hear their voices. I also use a lot of Google Docs, and I use a strategy Jamboard, a tech tool called Jamboard. And Jamboard is great because, again, it's this real-time way for students to be adding ideas. And I can see, even if they're all in breakout rooms, I can be, either in the rooms, following up and listening in or supporting and asking questions. And I can also be seeing what's going on in all of the breakout rooms because I can see their work, I can see their questions popping up on whatever it is they're sharing in. So those are really great strategies to manage, to encourage, to support student engagement in that virtual space.
I'll just add one more thing too there. One thing I'll do is I won't lecture on Zoom. I don't use Zoom as a lecture tool. I use it as purely a collaborative or practice space. If I do lecture, ASU did a study not too long ago that students will turn off a video lecture at about between 5 and 9 minutes. So what I'll do, and I will outsmart them here, is I will do several mini lectures, 5 to 9 minutes, using a tool called Screencastify, and I'll be able to share my presentation on video. So they have to, in alignment with a flipped model, they'll have to watch the videos before they show up on Zoom and before they come to class and attend those sessions, as just to develop that background knowledge. But I've learned very quickly, if I try to lecture on Zoom, I lose engagement completely. So I try not to do that as best I can.
Well, trust me, Kristen, even though I turned off my camera, and I did it for purely bandwidth reasons, just to keep good my attention span, I mean, is there, but it's mainly thanks to the engaging way you're running this conference today. So thank you very much. Before switching to the last question, we still have a little bit more than half an hour, so it's plenty of time to cover the last question. I have Professor Salohi Bushta, who's really insisting with the question around a certain type of disabilities, students with speech disabilities. So his question is around students with dyslexia. Are there any special measures or strategies around people who may suffer from speech disabilities?
Yes, so there's quite a few different options depending on what the individual is struggling with. And really, again, it's about access to content. So my job as the instructor, I'm not going to necessarily address the dyslexia. What I need to address is the content and find a workaround and accommodate that students need. So I will offer in UDL fashion different ways that they can access the material. So instead of reading it, they can listen to it. And then instead of typing it out, because a lot of times they have difficulty with accuracy in spelling and writing, they can speak it into the computer and then it shows up. Google Docs that actually will do this for you. They can speak it and the type will show up on the document itself. So there's different avenues that I've utilized in the past. I've also looked, Yale Center for Dyslexia is a wonderful resource for professors with a lot of different technology tools that can help students access curriculum and content. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but those resources are very robust, but primarily with the use of technology has been very effective. Yes.
If you can drop a link, I'm sure it could be useful, maybe Tanya or whenever we can get those links, I can share them later with our professors because they're absolutely interested. Katie, would you like to chip in as well?
Yes, I agree that also having choice for response. So having students being able to not only access the content in different ways, and then also having different ways to share their learning. In one of my courses, students have readings that they do, but then they have a lot of different ways that they can choose to capture their learning and share. So they have different formats, all different formats of graphic organizers they can choose from. Some are more text-based. Some they can choose visual organization, where they are actually including images and creating more of what's called a one-pager, where they can use images and quotes and different things to share their learning, so that it's less of a traditional response where you have to only access the material by the reading and then you only are sharing out your learning by, a rigid format for writing. So some of those choices and then they can lean into, again, what's working best for them as a learner, as Kristen was saying, rather than necessarily addressing the dyslexia, but addressing their the multiple ways that they can access content and share their learning.
Yeah, and I know a lot of programs too have standardized measures for testing. So I just wanted to add quickly that not only in the content processing, but also in the assessments, it's important to give them different options for response methods. So if writing is difficult, the test can be multiple choice. So you're not compromising content, but you are accessing what they do know in a different mode. So be very mindful about the testing procedures and things that they might need to show knowledge, whether it's a verbal test, they can give a presentation to share what they know, just different options for assessments.
Sure. Yet another wink to UDL, I can see.
Mhm.
So let me just share with you what Professor Babu, Asma Id Babu said. She said she uses the investigative approach as a method, as a strategy for engagement. She mainly teaches science subjects, and she finds that a really engaging tool. Just thought to share with you this because she dropped it in the comment section if you wanted to react to it quickly before we move on to the next slide. Any reaction, any quick reaction to this?
That's wonderful. I'm so excited to hear that, and really to hear that she's modeling exactly the way that we would want students to learn science. You know, we know that our students are not going to learn science most effectively by reading a chapter and, you know, filling out multiple choice questions. And so the way that you are shaping your instruction to match the way that you know is best for the elementary students also to learn that content, so that your teacher candidates not only participate as a student through that process, but then have the opportunity to see its value as a teacher and meeting both of those roles. That's very exciting to hear.
I'm sure you will agree with me that our group today is an example when it comes to engagement. So very, very pertinent questions. Let me go back to the previous question. And this is actually, I love this last one. How do you connect the student engagement strategy you use with your adult students to the student engagement strategies you would like them to use with their students? I really love this question. And I'm sure our professors are going to greatly benefit from this because they're in exactly the same situation. So if you can elaborate a little bit on this, and I'll probably start with Katie, if that's okay.
Sure. I would say that a question that I consistently bring into my instruction is, how does this connect with your internship? I ask my students that question frequently. I want them to not just wait to use or think about these strategies until years later when they have the sole responsibility of being the teacher, but I want them to make connections right now to the actual students that they're working with in their internships. And so I ask them that question consistently. How does this learning connect, or sometimes not connect, with what your mentor teacher does in the classroom? How does this connect to the ways that your students are responding? Have you seen this being done? Have you tried this in your internship? Have you had a conversation with your mentor about this? So even though I physically am not in their internships, my role is in their university classrooms. I'm not physically with them there, but I try to pull that internship into our classroom as much as possible through these discussions. And then they share with each other. And I find that those discussions are so lively. Students are so engaged as they start sharing their experiences in their internship and making connections between what we're learning about, what they're reading about, and directly how it impacts. It's a mismatch if they don't see a connection at all. And so then we want to talk about that. Well, why, we know this is something important that could benefit students. Why might we not be seeing it in the classroom space? What is the mentor doing instead, or those types of things? So I try to make the internship sort of like come alive to really have a place in our learning in the actual classroom, even though I physically don't go into the internship.
Wow, terrific. Kristen, any additions?
Yeah, sometimes it's very hard for our candidates to see a lesson and a product and have a tasked plan without knowing the cognitive process that goes on. So one thing I like to do is walk them through the lesson planning process as if I were doing it myself, and I'll tell them out loud what I'm thinking. Modeling my own thought process has been very powerful. Instructional decisions can be difficult for people who are learning to teach. So the more I can talk about my decision-making process, why I'm planning what I'm doing, the reasons why I've made curricular accommodations that I've made, the reasons why I chose to eliminate some extra material, they need to see my decision-making process out loud. So that's one thing that I'll do is I'll share metacognitively what I'm thinking. I also use a lot of role play in my classroom. So I will be, the teacher, they will take turns. I do this with inclusion teachers learning to partner and co-teach with one another in the different models of co-teaching when you have two people in a classroom in different roles. So I will model that myself, and then I'll have them practice it with each other and make it lighthearted and fun. They've got to teach about their favorite food or whatever it might be, just something that's easy as they're practicing that skill. I'll also show them what not to do. And just like Katie was talking about, in terms of what they see in their internship is not always best practice. So allowing them to see videos, unedited videos. I use a site called High Leverage Practices. They have a lot of unedited teacher clips that are wonderful for analysis. And so I have them very closely analyze examples of what to do, examples of what not to do, and see the difference there and the impact that those decisions that they make have on student learning.
Wonderful. I have here Professor Taya, who is actually mentioning another example of a pedagogy that he finds very useful, and namely project pedagogy, so projects-based pedagogy. So he's saying that he finds this strategy to be very effective in student engagements and in order to achieve educational goals that are linked to the learning of a specific subject, as he finds the opportunity to use innovative or actually to create didactic tools that are basically appropriate to his educational goals. So two key strategies: projects-based pedagogy and the creation of didactic tools. How do you evaluate that? What kind of feedback would you give Professor Taya with regard to these strategies? Kristen?
I am so excited that you're doing that. I am a big believer in project-based learning because of its constructivist methods. And so one of the things that I'll do to assess students is what's called a performance-based assessment. They'll take a project, they'll develop it, and then they'll give one another feedback. I will give them feedback. I feel that nothing is more valuable than that project-based approach because that's so closely tied to what they're going to be doing in the real world, in their jobs. So I think it's so wonderful that you're doing that. And as many opportunities as you can to have them collaborate with each other, the better. One thing that I also do incorporate in my performance-based assessments is the use of rubrics. So that's something that as I develop their grades and measure their progress and assess their mastery, I'll make sure before I give them the assignment that they have a very clear understanding of what the expectation is through the use of rubric-based instruction, or excuse me, rubric-based assessment that way.
Yeah.
But that's wonderful.
If I may quickly jump to another question, and I'll direct it to Katie this time, and it comes from Professor Al-Muhajir, Yusuf Al-Muhajir. And we discussed it yesterday in our preparation session, actually on Monday. The context that our professors find themselves in is that they get basically students from various disciplines. they might find themselves with students from a humanities background or from a science background, a STEM background. And the question here of Professor Mujahid is saying, how can we guarantee the interaction and motivation of students in a practical session, especially that sometimes they come from different backgrounds? I know it's a challenging question. There's probably not an easy answer to it, but if any tips that can be shared in this context, Katie, would yeah, I see you nodding, so definitely.
Well, that's a great question, Professor. You know, I tend to lean towards finding the common, what do we have in common, what is similar as a base. So, you know, what experiences have we had that even though our backgrounds are very different, we have expertise, content knowledge in very different ways, but what is it that's common? And I try to look for that as a starting point so that students can see that they can learn from each other, even though they may have very different and distinct expertise. And then from there, I try to use that opportunity to highlight their different expertise. I want them to see value in whichever background that they bring. So finding ways to highlight that expertise, even to find examples that I'm using that relate to multiple contexts so that I have that engagement, that connection to maybe a student who has done a lot of work in mathematics. I can use examples that are mathematics-based, or I can use examples that are science-based to achieve the purpose of them talking about high quality instruction. So starting with what's common and then thinking about my examples is kind of what first comes to mind. And then also I try to, as I look at my instruction, really pull out sort of those points that are most salient. What is, if I focus my instruction down to like 3 or 4 key points, how can I have my students interact with these in ways that I think everyone will be able to contribute and learn from? I think sometimes when we try to do too much, that can be really challenging for students, especially if we have students with all that are coming to us from all different backgrounds.
Wonderful. Again, some really interesting questions coming in, and this time a question from Professor Afaf is Sadawi, and what she's saying is, she says, I think that every student, in this case every future teacher, comes with their own style of learning, which influences the choice of teaching strategies that they will adopt in class. So how do you accommodate with this reality? How do you adapt styles, and how do you kind of identify these different traits that will ultimately, that they will ultimately use in their own classrooms? Kristen, would you like to jump in?
Sure. So with that, such a great question, Professor. Everybody's so unique and different in how they're going to manage their classroom. So I liken it to, the different styles of management that I've seen teachers use over the years, where we know that there are evidence-based practices that work. Anything outside of those evidence-based practices, you have the flexibility as a teacher to create your lessons in a way that you learn best, that you receive and also give out information the best. And everybody kind of knows themselves by this point, hopefully, as a learner. And so, the way that I incorporate choices is very apparent in my courses, but the big central theme that I want them to take away that's non-negotiable is explicit instruction and the use of evidence-based practices. If they have those core things and those core skills, and I'll drop in the chat here some of those elements that I make sure that they include, no matter what subject no matter what their style might be, as long as they're consistent in implementing those elements, then they have a lot of flexibility, because teaching is such a creative endeavor. And each of us brings such a different flavor to it. So it's important that they find that voice and show those preferences early without compromising the central importance of evidence-based practices.
Wow. That's so insightful. Katie, would you like to add anything to what Kristen just said?
Sure. And in addition to the evidence-based practices, I think we all have this really unique opportunity to use those practices in the way that is most authentic to who we are. And, I've had lots of wonderful instructors and teachers in my life, and they have been very different. And I think the ones that personally I can remember, I don't know if you want to think about someone in your mind who was a really impactful teacher for you. I would guess that it's someone that was really authentic to who they are as a person, and that they were able to bring that into their teaching. And what I love about the evidence-based practices, about taking, theory and putting it into our practice, is that we can all do that in our own authentic way, true to who we are. And I think that's what really is sort of the magic and the gift of teaching, is to be able to take these high quality strategies and bring yourself to them. I think that's what I would offer.
Sure. I realize it's it's a fasting day, and we're drawing closer to the end of the day. I know it's still morning for you, Katie and Kristen here. It's probably we're a couple hours before the break and fast, but I'm just amazed at the dynamism that's still going on. One question here from Professor Znibar Ahmed. I'm reading it, and it speaks to something typical here in Morocco. And we discussed it yesterday, Monday, a little bit. And it has to do with the multiplicity of languages that people deal with here in Morocco. And the question here is that sometimes during practicums or any practical sessions, professors would tend to use their mother tongue, which is not necessarily the classical Arabic language, but their mother tongue that they feel more at ease in using. And the question here, would that be considered appropriate? I mean, I know it's a very culture bound. But would you be for? What do you think about using languages that can be more, although not the official ones, but they can be more conducive towards better engagement and communication?
That's a wonderful question. I think so much of academic history is so valuable in the standardization that it's brought and the research that it's brought. But I don't discount the opportunity, even if it's in a different language or different dialect, to use that language as a connecting point with your students. So I think a balance of both or multiple languages. I am a firm believer in meeting my students where they are and showing them different ways that communication can be conveyed, whether it's academic language, whether it's a different type of dialect. And so it's important that we honor and value our students' culture, and with that comes the language. And so if they can see themselves as students mirrored in the curriculum that you're implementing and then refracted back, it's really an engaging point of connection that can be strengthened through dialogue.
Wonderful. One other question comes this time from Professor Ghanim Aziz, who is basically talking about the flipped classroom approach. We did talk about it. andragogy of the flipped classroom. So I think there's more interest if you can speak to this strategy, to this approach, and how it can be used. Kristen, you started by saying how much you like to send material to your students, basically to prepare before coming to class. Now, how how would you advise them to use that in their classrooms?
So in sending out reading material, viewing material, websites to explore a week in advance, it gives them time to develop background knowledge and context rather than me delivering it on that day. So when they come in after reviewing, let's hope they've done their homework, right? Okay. And when they come in, then they have context and they have background. So it creates more rigorous learning and a deeper learning once they have passed the introduction and they are now into a phase of learning where they can start to see how the concepts can be applied. And that's really where I want to step in as the guide and as the instructor, you know, rather than just disseminating information. They can do that in a way that works for them on their own time. I find it most useful to spend that class time in discussion, in project-based learning and activity and collaboration about those concepts that they've been learning about, rather than just introducing them and then having them go off and you know, answer questions or write an essay or something outside of class. It's much more fruitful, I've noticed.
Any additions, Katie, to this?
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. You know, we have a much different type of learning experience when students do come in prepared for the next steps. They might even have questions from the content that they want to ask their peers or bring into discussion. We also use the literature discussion group. So students come in, they're ready to talk, they have their notes. And so it's almost like we're starting out ahead with that content. They're already ready to jump in, share their connections to their internship, and move the class session forward. I also see it as my role, because sometimes the content that they're reading about, maybe in their text or their articles, it doesn't necessarily connect to everything we've done in the course. And so I feel that it's my job to bring them back and to cycle back through the content that we've already learned, so that they can see how this new learning that they've, you know, maybe they've done some of this work at home, how does this connect back with things that we talked about in the first week and in the fourth week of the class? I want them to see that continued value. And I think we might miss that opportunity if we were starting fresh with brand new instruction that they have never engaged with each class session. I think they have much better connections to the course as a whole, to be able to see how that learning has built from week to week to week.
Wow, I'm just impressed at how much great grounds we have covered today. Thank you so much for your generous interaction, both Katie and Kristen. Probably one of the last comments I will go back to, because I feel so proud because we've probably answered most of the questions here. Professor Tinfu comes back with a bit of a challenge, and I think I see it as a reaction to one of the answers that you recently talked about when he goes, I think we can only achieve linguistic immersion through the use of the language that we are supposed to learn. So he says there's a rule that says that we cannot learn a language by using another language. And he says, what's your opinion? So I almost see it as a pushback from what we were talking about. What do you think? Any reaction, Kristen or Katie?
Yes, so I believe in any culture. And I think, being in Arizona, we have a lot of emergent bilingual students that we've seen. And in literacy, and Katie can also speak to this, it's very important for them to know and understand the English language, but the rate at which that they learn it is going to be dependent on their literacy skills as well. And so it's not only important to just understand that they need to operationalize this language so that they can function. But it's also important to be respectful of the fact that the way that they learn that language is going to be dependent, and the pace is going to be dependent on the individual's understanding of literacy itself and language itself and the nuances and the structure of language. So we have to, yes, account for the fact this is the end goal. And there are multiple routes to get there. But I think once you see students prioritize one language or the other, that's where it becomes a little bit difficult. I believe, and I know that there's research that supports this, that they can learn both equally once they have those skills in place. And Katie's such an expert in that area too, with the young ones. Do you have anything to add to that, Katie?
Yeah, I think just what you said, and that the research supports the continued development of their first language, and that, in our context, yes, children are learning English in schools. We also, though, want to really support families and help our families and our students know that we also value and honor their native language, whichever language they use at home, and that by continuing to develop that language, it will only enhance their learning of English. And so those languages, can support that content really effectively. And we don't necessarily have the option to be teaching in another language in Arizona, yet we can definitely use those language supports as scaffolds to support them in their learning.
Wow, I feel that we're so punctual, because this is, exactly 4 p.m. here. So we have done really, really well in terms of answering the question, and I'm so proud to tell you that was the last question, at least on the Q&A session. So again, let me reiterate gratitude and thanks for the energy you've been showing in this presentation, Katie and Kristen. I don't know if you have any last words that you wanna add. The floor is yours if you have any concluding remarks.
I'd just like to thank everyone that joined in today, and I just honor your work and the time that you took out of your day to come and learn more about how to be better and how to be even more effective. I've learned so much from listening to Kristen, from your questions. And so just this collective, I'm really proud to be a part of this profession globally, where we collectively value learning so much, and that we can share our ideas in this way. So I appreciate you and all the time and energy and effort you put into your work.
Yes, and I just want to say thank you as well. I'm so impressed by the practices that you've already communicated and conveyed. You are already doing great things, and it shows. And just by the level of questions that you have, I know that your students are engaged already, and it's always a work in progress of learning how we can better our own practices as a model for them. So I just want to commend you for the work that you're doing. And it's just so exciting to see the positivity and the growth that we're all willing to engage in as professionals. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to spend this time with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. And thanks to our audience today, and our translator, and all the people in the dark who are facilitating today's session. And we'll see you in our next webinar. So thank you for a great participation and wonderful quality questions. And a big, big, big thank you to Professors Katie Morris and Kristen Arnold. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Wonderful. I'm going to keep the webinar open for just a moment in case anybody still needs the survey link. Thank you so much, Katie and Kristen. It was good to see you this morning.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you. This was so much fun. I appreciate it.
It was. I appreciate it also. And I'm like writing down notes from you, Kristen, of all these things. I'm like, oh yeah, I need to go back to that, or I need to check that out. So it was really fun to re-engage in all these ideas. Thank you.
Likewise, I was taking notes as you tried quietly. When you were
Yeah, I know. I was doing the side eye over here.
It would be great to connect though, Katie, at some point. I know we're gonna wind down this semester, but I would love to just connect with you at some point.
I'd love to. Yeah, let's do
Okay.
it.
We're speaking the same language.
We are.
Thanks. All right,
Thanks,
have a good day, everybody.
yeah, you too.
You
Bye.
go.
You
Bye.
too. Bye-bye.
Thanks.